Hello and welcome to another episode of Geared Toward Gear. My name is Sean and I am so glad you're here. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join me. So today we're looking at a knife from CJRB, and if you're not familiar, that is the budget subsidiary of Artisan Cutlery. They started producing knives I would say about 6 months ago. They've got several models already out. There's their Instagram handle if you want to follow them there. So yeah, CJRB, Artisan Cutlery's budget brand, and we're looking at the Feldspar. This is the newest, I think, offering from CJRB. I'm filming this on January the 2nd, 2020. Hard to believe it's 2020. And as of filming, this is still not yet available on your dealer websites. You can, however, purchase this if you want one directly from Artisan Cutlery, which is what I did. I paid for this. I ordered it from their website. It shipped direct from Hong Kong to my house in Texas, and it only took 3 days to get here, which I thought was pretty impressive considering I only paid like $4 for shipping. So let's get the short version out of the way. For those that are new to the channel, we typically kind of do a short and sweet kind of spec check, if you will. And then if you want to go about your day, thanks for stopping by. If you want to stay for the duration, we're going to go in a little more depth. And towards the end, these handles are going to change colors because I am going to dye the handle scales. And yeah, so that's going to be fun. So what's the short version? What are we looking at? So we're looking at an EDC folder that's 8 inches overall. It's got a 3.5-inch blade, and that's measured to the handle scale. Your actual cutting edge is about 3.25. It's a liner lock that deploys via thumb stud, which I'm pretty stoked about. It runs on ball bearing washers, so it's going to be nice and smooth by nature. It's configured to be carried tip up only, either right or left-handed. And the price tag on this guy is going to be around $50. I think I paid just over 50. However, again, once it hits kind of the major online retailers, my guess is that the price is going to come in probably closer to like $40. But I was really stoked on the design after seeing it on Instagram. I just wanted to get my hands on one, so I paid probably a little more than most people will, but that's okay. It also comes in 2 different sizes. This is the standard size Feldspar, and then there's a Feldspar small. They're not significantly different in size. The small is obviously smaller, but it's not super significant, and I'll kind of demonstrate that here in a moment. I don't have a small one. This is the only one that I have, but we'll deal with it. So let's do a couple size comparisons. If I didn't already mention it, the weight on this knife is about 4.2 ounces, so just over 4 ounces. So here's our first size comparison, which is another CJRB knife, the Centros, which is a fantastic knife designed by my buddy Dylan Mallory, and it's probably 3/8 of an inch longer, but definitely in the same ballpark. So if you own or have handled a Centros, it's kind of right there alongside the Feldspar. So now let's bring in the Ontario Rats, as we typically do. We got the Rat 1, and we got baby brother Rat 2. And you'll see the Feldspar almost lands kind of directly in the middle. Like I said, 8 inches overall, a pretty good sweet spot for an EDC. But if we remove the Feldspar and just compare these two, you'll notice that the size difference between a Rat 1 and a Rat 2 is pretty significant. In overall length, it's over 1.5 inches longer. It's just, the Rat 2 is tiny compared to the Rat 1. The difference in size with the Feldspars is not quite that extreme. So just take that for what it's worth. So yeah, that's the short and sweet, and that's our size comparisons. And let's just throw this on the scale real quick just to make sure that I am not lying and that I remembered the weight properly. It should be around 4.2. All right, call it 4.2, round up. So yeah, just a hair over 4 ounces. And I would say when you pick this up, to me, it feels heavier than it should. It's not grossly overweight for its size, but and I'm not either. I'm not grossly overweight for my size, but neither is the knife. And I think I don't know, it just feels a little heavier than it should. And there's a couple reasons for that I'll explain as we go through this. So let's talk a little more detail. Let's start with the blade. We got a killer drop point. I really like the shape. It's got just a bit of belly, just like me. So I'm digging that. It's a flat grind. The blade steel, as I mentioned, is D2. And we've got a nice kind of fine stonewash finish, which looks pretty well. They did a good job The grinds, the secondary grinds there, they're pretty even on both sides. So not a bad job as far as grinding that secondary bevel. Came wicked sharp, so really digging everything about the blade, especially the fact that it is sporting dual thumb studs and no flipper. 2019 I feel like was the year of the D2 G10 ball bearing flipper. So seeing a knife with thumb studs is a nice departure from that. Just like on the Centros that we looked at, and just like on the Civivi Governor that I reviewed not too long ago. If you haven't seen that video, definitely go check that out. But I love that this thing uses thumb studs, and the action is fantastic. And we'll get to that here in a moment. So everything about the blade, I'm digging. Just from a personal preference standpoint, the shape, I'm all about it. One thing I will note is that this is a flat grind, and it's got a pretty thick blade stock for a knife of this size. It's right about 3 millimeters. It does taper towards the tip, but it waits until about a half an inch from the tip before it starts to taper. And being a flat grind, you've got a pretty good amount of material in this area here. So although it does come to a very acute tip, this is not one that you really have to worry about or baby too much. I wouldn't try to pry, a car door open or use it as a screwdriver, but it's not as delicate as it may look, because the blade stock itself is thick, which adds strength, and there is more material than there would be, for example, on a hollow ground knife. So digging the blade. So let's move on to the handle. G10 comes in those 4 different colors that I mentioned. I went with the natural jade specifically because I wanted to dye this a color that they don't offer. So we'll do that here towards the end. The shape, I'm really digging. It's pretty neutral. This kind of sweeping spine here just kind of contours nicely into a palm. It has this kind of bulbous rear end to it, which I don't have a bulbous rear end. The knife does, I don't. And that's probably not something you ever want to say about a person. It's okay to say it about a knife. The knife has a bulbous rear end. You have a bulbous rear end. It's got a fat ass. Let's just be honest. The knife has a fat ass. But it makes for a very comfortable knife that feels very secure because it swells near the end here. I'm not in fear that this knife is going to try to move in this direction out of my hand. So it feels nice and secure despite the fact that there's no jimping and really no texture to speak of. It's pretty smooth G10, but it feels solid as a rock in my hand. I don't get a hot spot from the pocket clip. It doesn't bother me in the least. So it feels ergonomic and it feels comfortable. So I'm digging the handle. A couple other things to note real quick on the handle. Got a lanyard tube that's pretty good size. So 550 cord's going to go through there, no problem. It's pillar construction, so you got a couple of barrel spacers or standoffs towards the back, and that's kind of that. Got our deep carry clip, pretty standard, what you see on other CJRB knives and other budget knives. So a pretty standard clip that we've probably seen before. Carries really well, carries pretty deep, as you can see. You'll probably have 1/8 of an inch coming out of the pocket, so not a whole lot. One thing that's worth noting is that the liners are stainless steel, they're full liners, and there's no milling or weight reduction at all. So that's one of the things that's going to contribute to this coming in at over 4 ounces. So the fact that it's a pretty thick blade stock, it's a flat grind, and there's no milling on the liners is what makes it weigh what it weighs. I would have loved to see them mill those liners, because at this price point, we know for a fact, having seen it done on a number of other knives that are much less expensive actually, that we can reduce weight at this price point. So I think that was a missed opportunity. Is it a deal breaker? No, it's definitely not a deal breaker, but I really would have liked for this to come in maybe just a hair under 4 ounces. So that's just something to take note of. So here's the lock. We've got a liner lock, as I mentioned earlier. And it's locking up at about 50%, and it's a bank vault. Super strong, no lock rock, no side to side, and there's no lock stick. So disengaging this liner lock is crazy easy. And if we look kind of straight down at it, you'll notice that not only is the handle scale kind of cut out to accommodate your thumb, but the liner itself has been beveled. So getting my big old thumb in there to disengage this is a breeze. And again, being on ball bearing washers, when I do disengage it, that blade just drops, and then give it a little wiggle, and that's all she wrote. As far as deployment, you can slow roll it with the thumb stud, like so. You can, of course, flick it with your thumb, or it spidey flicks really, really well also. So it's a fun knife to play with. Even though it's not a flipper, it still does have that fidget factor, being a smooth knife. So I've had a good time playing around with it. So all in all, I'm really digging this design. I think it's a really, really attractive knife. It performed really well. When I test knives for reviews, I typically am opening boxes every single day. I am opening mail, I do some food prep, and I break down cardboard, and I intentionally make more cuts than I need to. And this thing held up really, really well. It's still cutting paper pretty cleanly. I don't have any lying around, but the edge held up really nice. So all in all, I think it's a total winner. And I do think, had this come out a little sooner, a little earlier in 2019, or I should say late 2019, I think you would have probably seen this knife on a lot of people's kind of top 10 lists. Because it came out so late, not a lot of people have gotten their hands on it yet. But the overall design, the shape, the fact that it's a thumb stud knife, it has two different sizes, a really nice blade shape. Yeah, it's great. I definitely recommend it. The centering on mine, as far as quality control is concerned, is not great. As you can see, it is off to the left noticeably. It's not touching, so functionally speaking, it's not causing any issues, but I would expect that to be more well-centered. So when I take this thing down and break it down completely to die the handle scales, when I put it back together, I think I may be able to address that and get it centered up, but we will find out. So that has been the CJRB Feldspar, the standard full-size version. So stand by. I'm going to head to the laboratory, dye these scales real quick. We'll come back and see what color they are, see how it looks, and that'll be it. So stand by, and I'll be right back. Just like that, she is now purple. No longer natural jade G10. I went ahead and dyed the scales purple, and I think they turned out pretty good. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my choice of color. And the shade of purple turned out pretty much how I wanted it to. And I'll post some high quality, high resolution photos on my Instagram and Facebook to give you a little better color representation. But I thought the purple and the gold accents around the pivots would be a nice contrast. And so that's why I chose purple. I believe it's called Royal Purple, and it's made by Rit Dye. And it took me probably, I would guess 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes at the most, actually in the dye. The natural G10 really takes color well. It'll take pretty much any color. So yeah, I am happy with the results. It went together, went back together without any issues. I was able to get the centering just a little bit better, but it's still definitely off to the left by just a hair. But no big deal. It still functions really nicely, and I'm very happy with the color. As a matter of fact, while I was doing that, I had a Boker Patriot, which is one of my favorite knives, and sadly they've been discontinued. But this one was orange, and I dyed this one kind of this deep crimson red color. They never offered this knife in red, and I always wish they did. They had it in blue, orange, black, tan, and I kind of had all the different colors. And my dad gave me an extra one that he had that was orange. And so while I was in the laboratory doing some dye jobs, went ahead and dyed that one red. So it's fun to do little projects like this from time to time. And this is the type of result that you can get with some dye on some natural G10. So maybe you want to pick up a Feldspar. Maybe you want it to be a certain shade of blue, red, purple, orange, you name it. Go with that natural G10. And the sky's the limit. So thank you guys again for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.